Broadcast has been set.
Thank you, Ms. Hadley. The time is now 5:01. I call to order the February 28th, 2023 meeting for the Policy and Governance Committee. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Alvaro Serrano-Ruiz. I am the chair of the Policy and Governance Committee and student member of the board. It brings me great pleasure to welcome everyone to tonight's meeting, and I look forward to our work tonight. We will start with introductions from committee members, starting with board members, administration staff, then board office staff and board legal counsel. So Vice Chair Fields.
Good evening, Board Member Walter Fields, Board Member at Large and Vice Chair of the Policy and Governance Committee.
Hi, Board Member Pamela Boozer-Strother, District 3, member of the committee.
Hi, Judy Mickens-Murray, Chair of the Board, but member of the committee.
I guess myself. Good evening, Carlotta Merrill, Associate Superintendent, High Schools and Non-Traditional Programs.
Yes, I'll go. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Barnes, the very proud principal of the Eleanor Roosevelt High School.
And good evening, Dr. Gorman Brown, Principal, Charles Herbert Flowers High School.
And good evening, I'm Robin Welsh, the Director of Government Relations, Compliance and Procedures.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Adlin. I'm Administrative Secretary in the Board Office and also Administrative Support to the Policy and Governance Committee.
Good evening, everyone. Dennis Whitley III with the Law Offices of Shipley and Horn. We're Board Counsel.
Thank you, everyone. Colleagues, before we go to the adoption of the meeting agenda, tonight we will have a slight change to the agenda format to accommodate for our guest speakers. So we will be addressing agenda item 4.0, which entails the interscholastic policy. We'll be doing that before agenda item 2.0, which is the legislative update. So with that being said, may I have a motion to adopt the February 28th, 2023 meeting agenda?
Move to adopt the February 2028 meeting agenda.
February 28th, 2023. Yep.
February, yeah, 28. Okay.
Second.
It's been properly moved in second to adopt this agenda. Any objections? Hearing none, motion passes. Agenda is adopted. Colleagues, may I have a motion to approve the February 14th, 2023 meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved in second to approve our February 14th, 2023 meeting minutes. Any objections? Hearing none, motion passes and the minutes are approved. Starting off with 4.0, policies for discussion. So tonight we have 3 policies for discussion. Colleagues, we will adhere to the 5-minute and 3-minute rules for discussion. And first up is policy 5122, interscholastic and extracurricular activities. I'll now yield the floor to Ms. Welsh, who will be accompanied by Dr. Carlotta Merrill, Dr. Gorman Brown, and Dr. Portia Barnes.
Good evening. So we have had numerous conversations about policy 5122 as it relates to previously we spent a lot of time discussing interscholastic athletics, and we did have the athletics department come and talk about the need for the athletics for the fact that there should be a 2.0 GPA requirement for students participating in athletics. And so we did make changes to that to the policy to reflect that. And then the second question that came up had to do with, should that same 2.0 GPA requirement apply to extracurricular activities? The previous policy, which required the 2.0 GPA for interscholastic athletics, did not talk about having it for extracurricular activities, and in fact, actually talked about the fact that extracurricular activities was an opportunity to provide enrichment to students and also engage students in school activities. Even those students who might not be doing that well academically, it might be a way to get them invested in their education. And so at this point, the very last draft did not contain the 2.0 GPA requirement. However, there was much discussion among the committee members, and several members felt like it should not be there for extracurricular activities, and others felt that it should be there. So there were a lot of different questions, and the committee has asked if we could have several people that deal with this day in and day out that could come and answer questions and participate in this conversation. So we did receive some questions from board member Booster Strother, which the principals did get together and provide some answers to those questions. But I'm assuming you might have even more questions that you might want to ask. And we can even begin first with board member Booster Strother's questions. She's welcome to interact with our two people. We're very fortunate to have both Dr. Brown and Dr. Barnes here, as well as Dr. Morrow, because they are the ones that are in the schools every day and know what's happening in terms of extracurricular activities. So I will open the floor to the committee and then the principals and Dr. Morrow to, interact and exchange conversation about this.
So do you want to go to questions first, Ms. Welsh?
However the committee prefers. I do see Ms. Booster Strother's, or board member Booster Strother's hand up, and she's the one that did provide questions. So it might be where we want to begin. So
Definitely. Board member Booster Strother.
All right, thank you so much for recognizing me. Yeah, I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because I don't think until we really got into this had I thought through much about extracurriculars, as a parent whose child now is just in middle school, beginning to learn a lot of things about how these opportunities work, but not in high school yet. And now needing to understand more in depth. A lot of my questions come because of pandemic disruption and the fact that, many of our students have had zero opportunity for any extracurriculars. So by the time they get to high school, any restrictions could mean they could get through PGCPS with no extracurricular activities if GPA is a criteria for everything. And so I asked some questions around the different types of, you see in there, the different types of clubs. There might be some that require GPA, like I could understand, like debate club or some mock trial, there may be some that's just a given, the way athletics are. So, for me, it's kind of like a starting point, and also your impression of this pandemic disruption, especially for some of the students now in middle school and hasn't had access to any, because maybe the nonprofits, just couldn't serve them anymore, like we see at Hyattsville Middle, swing space disruption for a couple of the schools, things like that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Barnes, would you like to start off, or I could kind of jump in answering the question?
You can go ahead, Dr. G. Go ahead.
Okay, well, let me start by saying we thank you for the invitation this evening. It's I'm so glad that you guys are engaging in this conversation, primarily because as we begin to recover from the pandemic, we have to get back to what do they offer besides the curriculum and teaching and learning? And how do we create our schools once again as an oasis for the community itself? So one of the great things that's always occurred at Charles Herbert Flower since before I arrived, and I've been there as principal since 2012, is that there is just a robust offering and clubs and activities for students to explore what they like and what they may want to become, and connect with their friends in a setting that is not in the classroom, not in the cafeteria, and something that's, I guess what you would say, kind of semi-formal, but yet and still it's structured around a singular purpose. So we have for years, and even during the pandemic, and I know that Dr. Barnes can talk about this because I believe that at the time she was at Occidental High School, and we were working on this wonderful Winning Wednesday concept, where on Wednesdays during the pandemic, we actually had students participating in virtual clubs and activities as a means to keep them connected to school. And what we saw in doing that, we thought, well, we'll put it out there, give kids an opportunity. We'll see what happens. And so we probably had 75 to 80% of our students who joined clubs virtually, just as a means to maintain communication with their friends in a semi-structured environment. So we took the energy that was gained from the pandemic and ensured when we came back that one of the first things we did was to put our clubs and activities, put them back into operation, give our sponsors the opportunity to sponsor again, and then do things such as open up our back to school nights with club and activity walkthroughs, so that not only the students, but the parents can get to know what the clubs and activities are about. Our 8th graders, as they come in for 9th grade orientation, they have the opportunity during the 9th grade orientation to meet different sponsors and students that belong in clubs and activities and hear from the students themselves about why their club is the best and what's so exciting about it. And that really brings a different energy to the room. So we have always done this, and we have not had restrictions on grade point average because we know that it's important to get kids connected and to keep them engaged. And sometimes for that student that is struggling, the thing that gets them to come to school every day is that club or that activity and the students and sponsors that are in that club and activity. And so in order to ensure that we give them a chance to be successful, that we find ways to inspire them, I think it's important that we continue to maintain the lack, I guess, the lack of an academic requirement for the participation in clubs and activities. Hope that answered the question. I think I talked a lot.
And if I could just, certainly echo a lot of the points that Dr. Brown made. Here at Roosevelt, we certainly have, I think it's 60 plus clubs and organizations. And so to his point, just like Flowers, Roosevelt is a science and tech school. And so what you find is that a lot of times, because of the rigorous requirements of the school day, we have a lot of science and tech students who, because of the schedule they have to have, they may not be able to take particular classes that are maybe more of the creative side or humanities side. And so because we have the vast amount of clubs and organizations, that is a place where they can then explore those aspects. They're thinking about maybe what they want to do in the future. And so that's another way that they're able to engage and also maybe interact with students that they may not interact with during the traditional school day. To his point too as well, when we talk about that student who is coming to school, honestly, just because of a club and an organization, I have certainly witnessed here, I have seen it in my previous buildings, that has been a source of another support, another adult, so to speak, when we talk about a sponsor who is able to be in touch with that student, motivate them, introduce them, again, maybe to other students. But I believe because we don't have that particular requirement, we talk about the extracurricular activities, we are actually saying to students that although you may not have the academic, requirements, say for a sport, or if we talk about honor roll, here is still another aspect of the school that we welcome you, that we support you, and that we kind of help you figure out what else it may be that you're interested in, that you may want to pursue from here. And we also talked about coming from out of the pandemic, where we know children have suffered some social deficits. This is now another layer to help them, because we absolutely see where the isolation from virtual learning, we know what we had to do, but it has caused some social deficits. And I think this is just another avenue, after the school day, to support, to reinforce, to help them build those skills. And, again, to help them be collaborative, to extend all the skills that you do get from the classroom, but now we extend that into another setting.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Fields.
So I have several concerns with the absence of a GPA requirement. First, I think 2.0 is a very low threshold. And it suggests that that is a minimal standard when as a school district, we are committed to making sure that our young people are college and career ready. My daughter was a student athlete and she also participated in extracurricular activities. She was in the band. And I never made a distinction between the two in terms of my expectations of her, in terms of her academic performance. I'm concerned that if we don't have some level of expectations for all students, and even though I understand that extracurricular activities are an enhancement, our primary purpose is to educate these children. And so I'm not comfortable with differentiating between a student athlete and a student who's not an athlete, who's just participating in activities, because they are both students. And somewhere along the line, I think we have to create the expectations that all of our students will exceed that 2.0 threshold, no matter their circumstances, and provide the support to help them reach that level. So I am prone to support the idea of an academic standard across the board for students, because even coming out of the pandemic, we know that we've had learning loss. We know that we have a growing achievement gap. And students, I think, sometimes need a little motivation to understand that while it may be a difficult climb, they are certainly all capable of achieving academic excellence or better academic performance. And I feel as though we let students off the hook when we simply say, we know you're only coming to school because this might be the only activity that you enjoy, being an extracurricular activity. How does that look at the end of the cycle when they are a senior? And we are saying that it is our responsibility to make sure that you are college and or career ready. Now, you can be college and career ready, certainly, by participating in extracurricular activities. But when it comes to the academic standard by which they'll be judged to take the next step in life, I would hate to send mixed messages to a part of our student population. So those are my concerns.
Thank you. If there's no response, I'll move on.
Would you like us to respond?
If you'd like to,
Sure,
if you
sure.
have a question, let me know.
Sure. So, and I get it. My wife and I have sent 3 of our own children through Prince George's County Public Schools, and we have had very high standards and expectations for our children. And 2 of mine are still with me at Charles Flowers, and I know that Dr. Barnes and Dr. Merrill and you, sir, have had those same level of investment, high expectations and standards for your children. But let me be clear that there is and you talked about an achievement gap. There is a growing, not just achievement gap that exists in our schools, but and a societal created gap, which a lot of our students do not feel like they're even a part of our school communities anymore. They were sent home for a year and a half, and a lot of them, the limited environment in which they existed during that time was challenging. They experienced failure, they experienced death, they experienced disengagement and disconnection, and then they were sent back to school in a lot of cases, expected to perform as if none of these things had happened. So some of these children, the thing that engages them to get them going, to reconnect them, to want to make them want to do better, is that sponsor and that club or activity. I actually, since I've been at Charles Flowers, have sponsored a mentoring program called Manhood 101, where we take young men who have experienced challenges and we embrace them wherever they are, with the goal of increased and improved academic achievement, the development of societal skills, the connection to college and career opportunities, that if we had a 2.0 requirement on, they would have never been exposed to. Those students are now, they're professionals, many of them. They come back and speak to the young men that are currently in the program. They talk about who they were at 14 and 15 years old and who they become now at 24 and 25 years old because of the influence of that club, that activity, that organization. And I would venture to guess that every school has an organization that embraces as the charge, closing the gap for those who are continuing to struggle. And if there's not, there should be.
Well, I sincerely appreciate that. I think, you know, I think I'm looking at a perspective of not necessarily an achievement gap, but an expectations gap. And I think that extends beyond the school district, that we have a population of students that no one really expects to achieve. And that, so how do we build within our school district that expectation, even if they come in struggling? Like even if we're saying to a student who comes in and wants to join a club, we'd love to have you, you can participate, but at the end of the year, we need to see that you meet this academic standard. Because I think part of what I am troubled by, and you know, I could be the perfect example, poor family, didn't have a dad after I was in 7th grade, my father passed away. But no one ever said to me, we don't expect you to, you know, excel. It was sort of like, we expect you to do well. If you have to, you know, do whatever you have to do. And I participated, I was a student athlete, I participated in activities. So I honestly agree with everything that you just said. I'm just at the point where I'm looking at the expectations of our children, are mostly Black and brown children, and saying as a district, we have to somehow, even if we don't include a grade point average requirement, we have to communicate in some way that if you are participating in this extracurricular activity, we have this expectation of you that you will also excel academically, just like we do our student athletes. I think that's where I'm coming down on all of this.
Thank you. Board Member Briggs.
Thanks so much, Chair Saron Ruiz. And thank you to all the principals that are here today and participating. We really appreciate it. I just have a question, and I'm going to come at this from the angle of an educator, a former educator, and a person who also is concerned about research. And I think what that says, I would love it if you all, if all of you or any of you could speak to what the research says around, if possible, around the benefits of extracurricular activities on students' mental health, on their academic performance, on their motivation in school. You know, is there any reason to suggest that withholding, you know, participation in these programs would actually benefit students, or is it actually the opposite based on what the research says? And I just think about this too personally, like, you know, I know that our goal really as educators and also school leaders is to make sure that our students are receiving a holistic learning experience. And I think one that, you know, both is from the academic end of it, but also from, I think, the social emotional, from the personal, and really the life skills end of it. And just kind of applying this to our lives as adults here is like, you know, if you are having poor work performance, you know, you're not going to not go to the gym in the morning if that's something that helps you with your mental health, or, you know, you're not going to say, I'm not going to go hang out with friends, you know, on the weekend, because those relationships are important. And so I really just want to speak to the maybe moving it away from a academics only focus, and more so to the holistic end of it, of our students really being prepared for the world and having outlets and opportunities to grow and expand. So I would love it if any of you could speak to that and to the research, if possible.
So I don't know that we prepared directly research around extracurricular activities, but we do know what the research says about students having relationships and being connected to schools. And that tells us all the time, 100%. And our students tell us that definitely, that when they are connected to individuals, have relationships in the schoolhouse, they do so much better in what they're able to do as it relates to the whole child, as you mentioned. And so that's so important in looking at this, because again, I too, like Mr. Fields, totally believe in the high standards around the work and understand your sentiments of wanting to set the high standards and not just say, hey, it's okay that over here you can play in the band, but over here you can't play basketball, so I totally understand that. But the way the policy is currently written, it doesn't really address the components of that whole child being connected to the school. If in fact we say you need that GPA, but again, I'm not sure, Robin, if you prepared any research per se, but we definitely know what the research says around students in relationship and being connected to at least one person in the schoolhouse.
I haven't done any research related to extracurricular activities, but I have read much of the research as it talks about building relationships with students and at least having one person for a student to be able to connect with, and what difference it makes in their ability to achieve in the school.
And can I just add to the conversation? One of my favorite books as an educator is Drive by Daniel Pink. And so Drive, this is the surprising truth about what motivates us. One of the quotes that always stuck out to me, and that is that human beings have an innate inner drive to be autonomous, self-determined, and connected to one another. And when the drive is liberated, people achieve more and live richer lives. So what we did during the pandemic was completely oppositional to that, right? So that everything that occurred, people were not autonomous. They were not self-determined, and they were not connected. And so as we get them to a place where they can begin to work towards becoming self-actualized, towards having this internal motor to want to do better, the key to that is connection and being connected to an adult that shares love or can help guide along with other peers that are along that journey with them is the thing that often takes them from not having that intrinsic motivation, that are only extrinsically motivated with, and a lot of times people, extrinsically motivate through fear or things, things that are non-productive, to a place where now they want to do better, where they want to see a life improve. So if anybody hasn't had the opportunity to read Drive by Daniel Pink, please pick it up. It's a great book.
And the one thing I would add, sorry, McIntyre, is I just wanted to say the whole child piece. I think that's something that's really important. I really appreciate you bringing that up, Dr. Morrow. I was saying holistically, but the whole child piece, and to my fellow board members, I think as you're kind of moving past this conversation, just kind of like doing some research on whole child, whole brain learning, I think is really aligned well with this piece, and really speaks to the power of these types of opportunities for students and actually being a beneficial thing versus not. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you. Chair McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair Sharon Ruiz, and thank you to the administration for being present tonight. I started off this conversation right where Board Member Fields is. I have moved, and the reason I have moved is because I've been watching a lot of videos and webinars that speak to children having positive adults in their lives. So I get the connection piece now. I truly understand that, and I think it's extremely important. I also went back to when my children were in school, and I don't recall my daughter having any requirements for grades around being a cheerleader and all of that, and being in the Girl Scouts, and my son being in the where you build the cars and you compete with the cars. I think that was Boy Scouts, I'm not sure. And then we did baseball and all of that. So what I'm saying to you is this: I don't want to take anything away from our children. I heard you say that we've never had a requirement for grades when it comes to the activities. Am I correct? Is that what I heard? Is that we never had that as a requirement?
Not officially.
Not officially, okay. So I would rather not impose something new on our children, because we're imposing a lot with the new requirements that we want them to excel, want them to learn, trying to get tutors in classrooms, trying to get mentors into their lives. So Board Member Fields, I'm moving away from you on this requirement today, and I just wanted you to understand why. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Bruiser Strother.
Yeah, thanks again. And Dr. Brown and Dr. Barnes, really great to hear from you and have this opportunity. And I think now now that I better understand, what's happening in the schools, I think I want to move, to Dr. Morrow about what are the overall expectations of the how many clubs and activities, the standards of that, like the diversity of opportunity, the marketing. I think I called out on my early questions that I could go to some high school websites and see really organized like Excel charts that show you everything and who the sponsor is, and then I could find none on others. So I think if we're talking about this opportunity, we really need to talk about, is there equal access? Does every student feel as equally informed of their opportunities as every other student? And how is that measured? And what are the standards put on our high school and middle school principals around that?
So thank you. And thank you for sharing that document from Montgomery County. We don't have a document like that, and we've never set a clear standard on how many clubs and activities every school must have. What every school has is emoluments built into the union contract for staff to actually sponsor clubs and organizations, which must be approved by the principals of the school. And what we found lately, it's actually been harder for us to get sponsors and to get individuals to actually host clubs and organizations in some of our buildings. And so when you talk about the equity and access, sometimes it's just the nature of certain schools having the availability of resources around, first and foremost, the human capital to actually have programs and things. But because this has definitely come to our attention, we'll definitely look at this as we do with athletics. In some of our cases, the same happens with interscholastic sports, where some schools have more sports than others based on coaches, sometimes the requests of students. And that's what you find with many of our schools, because all of the organizations should be student driven. And so many of our students don't know the opportunities that are out there. And so we try to do our best to promote, in every school, some of the same clubs and organizations. So for example, everyone should have a National Honor Society. We've asked that every principal have some type of principal leadership council, whether they call it their advisory, their ambassadors, so forth and so on, and so then you find the choirs, the bands, some of the same types of things that are taking place. But then you may get to a Suitland or a Northwestern with the VPA program, where they'll have the arts program, which has the other clubs and organizations attached to them. So there's a variety, and it's not so much of a set formula, because you want the choice to match the students and their requests and their needs. So you don't want to say, oh, okay, everybody must have this club, but there's no interest from the students, or you don't have a staff member with the talent to even run that club and give the students a quality program. And so, but based on your questions actually made me question and say, how do we create something like this, and making sure that we ensure that all of our schools do post their activities on their website. So that is something that has been on my preview since I got your questions, actually, because again, we have, and the hardest part is the monitoring, actually, so we have extracurricular doesn't fall under any one person. So whereas athletics, we have an athletic director, we have all the coaches and things, but then when you get to extracurricular, it's kind of, well, who wants to do it, and then it's the monitoring component of after school activities and things of that nature that actually falls on administration, and so that's a big piece of it as well, that monitoring and accountability. But you did raise some questions for us to look at as the Area 3 office, definitely.
Yeah, I appreciate
It's too
that.
for middle school.
Yeah, I think, I just think there's been some disruptions that the pandemic disruptions might be more prominent in some of our communities, and maybe I'm seeing some more disruption than other high schools, just, due to the demographics, and raises different questions. What my final question is, can parents and caregivers and community members have an influence on creating these clubs and opportunities? Can they come forward to a principal to volunteer? Or is it all, do you have to be PGCPS employee to sponsor?
No, so you would go through the same process like a volunteer, to be a volunteer in the building, and we welcome volunteers. And so there are some clubs and organizations that have outside volunteers, just as we have outside coaches. And so if a parent has a talent, it's just a matter of having that appropriate approval from the principal, and going through the proper background, fingerprinting and so forth. I'm sure Robin is smiling at that, just to make sure that everyone is properly vetted to be in the schools.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Field.
I really do appreciate this conversation and all the input from staff this evening. So on the question of monitoring, and again, I continue to hold fast to this notion of high expectations. I think we have to find a way to track the academic progress of students who participate in extracurriculars, because I would hate for a situation to arise where we have students participating in a number of activities, even knowing the benefit they receive from participating in their activities, and we don't see the academic progress that we need to meet our standards of college and career readiness. So I guess my final word on this would be, I still support the idea of a GPA. I hear my colleagues on this, but I do think that we need some sort of monitoring to make sure that all of our children are held to the same standard and expectations, whether that's the imposition of a GPA or monitoring their academic progress. So if we don't see that progress, then we can make adjustments in their participation.
Thank you. Board Member Briggs for a final round.
Yes, this is the last thing I'll say, but I just want to say something that came to mind for me too was, as we're moving forward, and I really appreciate all the suggestions from everyone, was that correlation isn't causation. So, just because something is there doesn't mean that that's the root cause or that's where it's coming from. And so I want to make sure that whatever it is that we're doing, or whatever it is, and especially I think tracking is so important for student outcomes, but I just want to make sure that as we're thinking about how we support students and the wraparound supports that we offer them, that we're also clear on what those things are. They're going to really move the needle on, student outcomes and student success. So that we're not, again, correlation isn't causation, or correlation isn't causation, right? So I think with that in mind, it's really important that as we're thinking, especially like a researcher would, we're trying to figure out, what as educators can we do to really get students to where they need to go. And I wouldn't want us to do anything that is hindering that. And so I think that's the piece that I would love maybe for continued discussions on, is really identifying like what that is. And also, again, principals that are here, if you could speak to some of those things that really drive academic success. There's a ton of research out there in the education field. I've worked in the education policy field, so that's why I'm speaking in that way. And I feel like those are things that I know are really important drivers towards success, and really understanding what those things are. And so I just want to make sure that we aren't pushing our students in a direction where we're not getting what we ultimately want, which is for them to be successful and to have those opportunities.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Briggs, what's your question?
If you could speak to, again, I think from your expertise, like what exactly are the drivers that really move student academic success? And is it connected to extracurricular activities? And by the way, I want to apologize. I think you all heard me smacking on my cereal and no one said anything to me. Sorry, I was really coming back from work. It just got back here. And so I was starving. But yeah, so if you could speak to just if withholding the extracurricular activities is something that's helpful or not. But if so, what are the drivers towards academic success?
Dr. Brown or Dr. Bonds, do you want to speak to that at all, or do you want me to speak to it?
Sure, I can. So, self-determination, right? And so a lot of that has to do with early on. So students that we see that are successful, there's a couple of things, and it could be parent motivation, it could be community support, it could be a cultural expectation. There's a lot of things, but one of the things that we often see is that a kid has learned self-discipline and self-determination in activities that they enjoy doing, and then they transition those skills, that ability to focus, that ability to not just not the whole idea around not just practice make perfect, but perfect practice makes perfect. Those types of strategies translate to the classroom, and so when we find children that have early on connected with a passion somehow, whether it's sports, whether it's robotics, whether it's spoken word or writing, whatever it may be, but they've learned to discipline and organize and structure around things that they enjoy to do. So when they get to a space where maybe they're not as experienced, they know what it feels like and what that experience is like to actually discipline themselves for success. So that's one of the things that I see is a commonality around young people who are experiencing success.
And if I can add, in addition, to a student success is accountability. So when we talk about the monitoring, and so, for instance, we have at the very beginning of the year, we have an administrator who oversees all of the extracurricular activities. We hold a meeting where the administrator meets with all of those sponsors. And so whereby we don't have an academic requirement, so to speak, those sponsors or those adults who oversee those programs know that we certainly have an accountability expectation whereby they are, for one, your club has a purpose. And what is that purpose? And that purpose should exemplify or support our well-rounded student, whether it's academic or not. And then things such as when you are meeting, you have an agenda. And so what we say to sponsors are, when we talk about the skills that are transferable. So just like in any club, you'll have a president, a vice president, a secretary. So they're creating agendas. They have an order of business to talk about that particular day. They may have a major event that they're planning for first semester, second semester. So while it's not necessarily an academic requirement, we are instilling and upholding them to some professional or some transferable skills to college, to career that they will carry on, which again, to your point, speaks to these skills that are that speak to excellence, maybe not necessarily academic excellence per se, but still creating a whole child who would then leave this building and have these skills that they got from the VEX Robotics Club or that they got from the knitting club, so we definitely speak to the sponsors. And the other piece is as the sponsors get to know these students. So when we pass one another in the hallways and another teacher and they say, oh, well, yeah, so-and-so was at the meeting. Okay, well, how's he doing? Well, hey, in class, I had to talk to him. So maybe, when you meet with him after school, you can talk to him about why he's struggling with this, so we, again, we talk to our sponsors about all of those expectations, as a building, creating these opportunities for our students.
Thank you. Board Chair Mickens-Murray to close out discussion.
Yes, my last comment is I believe students need to feel connected, not connected, but validated. They need to know that somebody accepts them for who they are and where they are. And usually in clubs or those extracurricular activities, they can find that connection. So I just wanted to put that on the table. Being a cheerleader sometimes can come from peers. It can also come from adults. So I'm in support of not having the grades associated with the extracurricular activities.
Thank you. And thank you, colleagues, for I think what was really great conversation. I too share my sentiments. I don't think setting a GPA requirement for extracurriculars should be how we set this policy, because I believe that a lot of our clubs, there are clubs who are set to help students who go below that 2.0. And so if our policy is preventing them from being members of those clubs, it's kind of, back and forth. So I definitely believe that students should be given the opportunity to build some connection to school. If academia is maybe lacking, give them that connection to someone who's going to uplift them, give them the resources and support them and encourage them to get up to that 2.0. So yeah, so with that, colleagues, are we okay to move the policy as it is now for review? Okay, I'll just take that as a yes.
Yes, for me.
All righty, thank you. So Ms. Welsh, if you could continue the review and come back to the committee as soon as it's done.
We'll have it ready for the next meeting for action.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Barnes, Dr. Brown, and Dr. Morrow. I truly appreciate your comments. I think it definitely helped us when it came to deciding how we're going with this policy. So thank you. Feel free to stay if you'd like. If not, have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks for
Hey,
having me.
guys, take care, guys.
All
Thank
right.
you so much for your hard work. Continue to
Yeah.
support the schools. All right.
All righty, colleagues. So moving on to policy 0121, people first language. I'll yield the floor again to Ms. Welsh for an update and proposed revisions.
So the people first language was up for review, for revision, review, and it basically just provided sort of a basic statement about the fact that we want to never call anyone by their disability, but call a person with a disability, whether it's an adult or a student, and how important that is. And that at one point in the policy, it does make the statement that that no one is allowed to ever speak about a student with a disability or an adult with a disability as a so let's say a special education student versus a student receiving special education services. So I did take the policy and first of all put it into our format that we use now, so that we actually have a policy statement and then a purpose. And in the policy statement, I incorporated definitely the language from the current policy, but I also did add some language related to our strategic plan in terms of equity and academic achievement. I think in the policy statement, I said the board also firmly believes that the academic achievement of all students is paramount and must improve. And to that end, the reprogramming of thoughts about all students' ability to reach their full academic potential without regard for their race, ethnicity, citizenship status, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, economic status, culture, language, or special needs is imperative. And so I wanted to make sure I had incorporated part of the belief statements that are coming out of the strategic plan. And that language is probably very important because, and I've seen it in my own experience in watching teachers work with students, and that if a teacher has a certain belief about a student or students in terms of what they can and cannot do, that oftentimes is the biggest interferer and hindrance to a child making progress. So the fact that you would call a student by their label first, it's a word, but words reflect your thoughts, and thoughts then impact your actions. So that's why I did put that language into your policy statement. And then under standards, I basically, of course, did include the language that was there previously about saying that where it says that their people first language will acknowledge individual respect and personal dignity, and regardless of ability or disability, and that it should always be used in all written and spoken communications within Prince George's County Public Schools, because that was there previously. But I did add some language specific to instruction and making sure that it's a culture that promotes in the school environment of high expectations for all students, and actually in the work environment for staff performance. And that we maintain environments that are equitable, fair, safe, diverse, inclusive, basically incorporating again some of our strategic language. And then the other thing is under implementation and responsibilities, I did not say that authorize the CEO to do a administrative procedure because I think your policy basically says it all. But what I did put in, and this is a little bit different, and certainly you're welcome to change it, this expectation would be addressed in our employee code of conduct. Because if you go through our employee code of conduct, we frequently, it reflects either requirements out of the policies or requirements out of the administrative procedures. And I know for a fact that this particular requirement is not in the employee code of conduct, and also that all employees get trained on the employee code of conduct and what are the expectations for all staff. So I felt like that would be important if this is our beliefs, your belief system, and this is what you expect to see in the performance of everyone in the schools.
Thank you, Ms. Welch. Colleagues, I'll open the floor for comments or questions. Okay. Board Member Briggs.
Sorry about that. So something that I, upon second review of this document, would just want to maybe get clarity on, Ms. Welsh, if it's not clear in here is the trainings, because I feel like there are some trainings that I would really want to see required for teachers around like implicit bias and then I think also like restorative practice, how to have restorative practices with students, how to have those conversations that I've seen kind of work well in some schools. And so I know that like education equity is obviously really important, core beliefs and commitments, or either some language in here around ongoing trainings that are really tailored to, addressing implicit bias, addressing socioeconomic inequities that exist. And I think really even pushing it more so on reflections for teachers to kind of, be able to identify their background, their identity, and how that shows up in the classroom for students are some things that I would ideally love to see as like pushes in this piece of legislation if possible, and if it's not included already in the trainings that exist.
So we actually do significant amount of training through Safe Schools, and we do address, and I'm going to go back and re-look at this. Every year we are constantly revising the list and everything, but I know that we have it off the top of my head. I cannot even think the name of it, but there is one that does address cultural diversity, I can't remember the name of it, but I want to go back and look at and see specifically if it's that what you're talking about is addressed within that Safe Schools, because these are all mandatory requirements from the CEO to all staff. And we do track whether all staff members do complete this training or not. In fact, I just last week just sent out to every division chief reports on our rounds of trainings on who has done their trainings and who haven't. And they're very good at following up with staff. So let me go in and we'll double check and see what we have. And if not, then it's something that we can certainly look at in terms of inclusion for the upcoming school year.
Right. Yeah. And I was going to say, I'm not sure if you were going to say culturally responsive.
Yeah, that might be it. That might be what it was. Yes.
And even if that's not in the training, if it's like also just in the professional development opportunities, that's fine too for me. But implicit bias, I would love to know if that one specifically is in.
And I will check and let you know at our next meeting.
Thanks so much, Ms. Welch. Okay.
Thank you. Board Member Bruce Strother.
Thank you. What I was thinking about is this seems like one that maybe should be rolled into the equity policy. I'm looking at how we had dissolved a couple of others to bring it all in one place to have that comprehensive view of our equity commitment. So I don't know if that's something we want to do in this round, but when the equity policy comes back up, this may be a logical one to roll into, and we might find that there's others. So that was one thing I wanted to point out. And then just in reflection on Board Member Briggs, I was going to recommend you ask for Dr. Goldson and Dr. Reese's history of the last 3 years of the
That's a good point
implicit
too.
bias training of the systemic implicit bias training to get some sense of the different professional development and expectations. And something I think you probably would have enjoyed was in our first summer, we did a book study with Dr. Goldson on implicit bias, and I think well over 1,000 employees
Right.
chose to be in a book club that summer, and we did three summers in a row. So there's been a lot of interesting approaches that I think have been under Dr. Goldson, and I think under Dr. David Reese, hopefully will continue beyond her retirement. So I would encourage you to ask for some history on that. I think you would enjoy seeing some of that work that's been done.
Thank you. Chair Mickens Murray.
And Mr. Briggs, I would suggest that you take the safe schools training because explicit bias is in there. I haven't finished my whole training, Ms. Welsh, but I'm working on it. I promise you I'm working on it. But
That's
it
wonderful.
is definitely there. So I just wanted to offer that to my colleague. Thank you.
And we actually are having systemic professional development on March 6th. And that is all set up through David Reese's office. And I know Dr. Goldson has been involved also in the process. So, and it's all along the lines of implicit bias, looking at, in fact, this past summer, we had a whole session that had to do with a wide variety of topics. And one area was very specific to also students with disabilities. So we have done a good amount of training in that area.
Thank you.
Okay. No further comments. I guess you want to maybe bring this back, Ms. Welsh, with what was discussed.
Yep, and ready for action. I will see if I can't get it through the review process and have it ready for our next meeting.
Okie dokie. Thank you. All right, policies down. Policy 5168, automated external defibrillators. Ms. Welsh, I yield to you.
So this was a policy, I think the last time, or I think when it was done was back in 2010, and it basically just said that we were going to have automated external defibrillators in each of the high schools. It was just sort of a blanket statement. Since then, actually it says 2006, so it must have been then changed in 2010, but it was just a basic statement. And since then, there has been a lot of changes in the world of AEDs. Number one, so each school is supposed to have an AED, I'm sort of talking out of line real quick, and then I'll take you through the procedure, the policy. It's supposed to have they're supposed to have an AED program, basically, and that you have to actually go through and be evaluated by the emergency medical services group. And we actually have a certificate that comes from the state of Maryland that says basically that we certifies that we are capable of providing AED services, and it's good up until April 5th, 2025. So we have met the requirements in terms of there's training requirements, there's upkeep requirements in terms of maintenance, making sure it's working at all times, and then location requirements. So in addition to that, then last year a bill was passed. It was House Bill 836. And in that bill, it actually talked about, this was specific to student athletes, but it impacts AED. So I felt it was important to incorporate it into the policy. It had to do with the emergency action plans. So in this policy, you'll see that it starts off by addressing the public access automated external defibrillator program, which we're required to have, and what you must do in order to be considered a registered agency that can provide these AED services. And then I also then address the venue specific emergency action plan, because that is also a legal requirement that happened last year in terms of AEDs. So very briefly, it starts off with our policy statement that basically says that we believe that our visitors, our students, our employees should have access to immediate first aid and 911 emergency services. And so the purpose of the policy is to provide guidelines for the administration and management of the AED program. There are a few definitions, and then it starts off with the program. So, and the management of the program actually falls under a safety and security department. And I actually have a typo here, security services typo, security services department. I missed that word, sorry. I'll put that in anyway. And how they have everything set up in terms of implementing the program has to be in line with Education Article 13-517. So we have to have a valid certificate, which I just shared with you. We absolutely do, and we've met all those requirements, which means that several of the things are we have to have a written protocol when we're using AEDs. So for example, if you had to use an AED in a school, you absolutely must call 911 as soon as possible when you've used it to bring them on site. And we have that in our protocol. And then we, within the protocol, have maintenance, placement, operation, reporting, and quality improvement procedures. And so I'm putting this in your policy as you're stating what it is that you want to see that we have. And we do have these things. And then we also have schedules for maintenance of each of the AEDs and any related equipment and supplies that are needed. And then the other thing is ensuring that each individual who is expected to operate an AED is provided training on how to use the AED. However, if you look in the law, it does say that if you've been trained in an AED, but you open up your AED machine and the machine actually has specific directions that are different than your training, you are supposed to follow the directions on the machine, which I think is quite interesting. So it does say that out in the law. So that is sort of the whole piece of what should happen as what your expectation would be that we would have in terms of the total AED program across the system. It also talks about having a actual, and we do have this in safety and security services, someone who's designated as the AED coordinator and our safety officer. It has that responsibility. And then that it goes into, again, just the following up with the maintenance and the training that is required, and collecting data that has to be submitted. The other thing that does address is immunity. So because that can be a concern for both for the school system and the employee who is using the AED machine, the AED. So as what it says is that in addition to any immunities under law, that the Prince George's County Public Schools will not be civilly liable for any act or omission in the provision of automated external defibrillation as met by the above requirements. If we've done that and we possess a valid certificate at the time of the act or the omission. So that's important. And we do have ourselves covered because we do have our certificate. And then additionally, any individual that is trying to help someone who's had a sudden cardiac arrest, and they use an AED, then they are also would not be held civilly liable if they were operating in a reasonably prudent manner and they actually really believe that the person was experiencing a sudden cardiac arrest, and that they also weren't charging a fee for providing the AED service. So that's just picks up the immunity piece. And then the last piece has to do with venue specific emergency action plans. So in the new law that came out, it actually AEDs must be in middle and high schools. And we do have them in middle and high schools. And specifically each school has to have their own venue specific emergency action plan. And it has to talk about where the AEDs are located. And this is related to athletics. And so an AED is provided on site and it's located at or within a brief walk from an athletic practice or event on school property. And then the fact that the AED must be freely accessible during all school functions. And then all members of the coaching staff are trained in the operation and use of AEDs. And that a trained member of the coaching staff is present at all athletic practices and events on school property. So right now at this point, I checked both with safety and security services, and I also checked with athletics in terms of number one, how many AEDs do we have around? And most schools are provided right now at this point 3 AEDs, one for athletics, one that's like in the main office, and one that is, I think, somewhere very accessible throughout the school. But they also have a portable, every school for athletics has a portable AED. And then the coaching staff are trained in the use of that. And when they have practice going on, so I asked the question, they said, well, so they just take the portable AED with them to the practices or to the event. And I said, well, isn't it true that you could have several practices going on at one time during the day? So how does that, or during the evening after school? So how does that work? And actually they have a central location. Each of the schools have a central location, like say out in the, like if right now we're moving, well, right now we're starting to move into outdoor sports again. And so they would have it in the middle of the practice field so that one of the coaches could run and get it if they needed it for a particular student. So I did pose the question with operations about the possibility that maybe down the road they want to add some more AEDs to their budget, to ensure that we have more of them available. But at this point, we are working towards meeting all these requirements that are in the law. So that's pretty much that in the nutshell as far as AEDs that we're required to do.
Thank you, Ms. Welsh. Colleagues, discussion? Chair McNamara.
Yes, I have a question. You talked about employees being trained coaches to operate these devices. How do we ensure that one of those individuals is present when the students are having the practices or the games? Or is there a place they check in? Is there a requirement for the principal or somebody to know who that individual is for that particular?
So when I spoke to athletics, so they are required to, every single coach is supposed to be required to have training in AED and CPR. I said, okay, that's great. So are they all trained in AEDs and CPR? And they said that they are moving, prior to COVID, everyone had been trained, but since then, with so many different changes, they have not gotten every single person trained, but they generally have. So if you think about us, most of the sports, they don't just have one coach, they have several coaches usually, or assistant coaches, or even volunteer coaches. And so what they work on making sure is that at least one coach per the athletics going on has that training. So not every coach that's out there on the field might have that training for a particular, like say for football or track or whoever with all the extra coaches, but at least one of say 4 or 5 coaches would have that training. But their goal is to get every single coach trained in that area.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but my ask is, when the game is going on, how do we ensure if it's just that one individual in that school is present at that game? Because God forbid, if something happened and that person was off today, I'm just saying, how do we ensure?
I can answer that question. That's a good question.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fields.
I would have the same concern for the regular school day. So if you have an incident during a school day, making sure that you have somebody in the building who is trained and certified, as well as what is the procedure if there is an incident. So you have a student who collapsed in a hallway in one part of the building. Is there a message sent out over the PA system? How is that communicated so that the person who is trained knows to get the AED and to get to that student as quickly as possible?
So now we do have an administrative procedure on the AEDs that list out many of the things that you are talking about. And I'm just thinking, and I will go through it, but that what they're going to have to do is incorporate many of these little details into this administrative procedure so that they have all their bases covered for whether it's just a regular school day or whether it is a athletic event. The other thing is there's supposed to be AEDs available in, like, say, our office buildings, so that if something were to happen and one of our employees or a visitor to the building ends up having a sudden cardiac arrest, that people know that there is an AED and there's someone there that is trained. And really, you probably need several people trained, because there's no guarantee that what you just said, that one person will always be there every day. So I think these are all good points that definitely have to be incorporated into the the procedure. And I will follow up with Office of Safety and Security Services in terms of these recommendations too, for them to make sure we get this incorporated.
Thank you, Board Member Briggs.
Yeah, this would be just my one piece, Ms. Welsh, is I'm just curious if, because I know all teachers have to take the CPR training, and I think that's an annual thing that they have to do, or like every 3 years or something like that. But I was curious if making the AED a part of the CPR for all teachers, if that would be an additional burdensome cost for the school district. Would that be something that's just easy, like as they're doing the CPR, they can just get that out the way too, so that everyone at least has some idea of, what to do, how to use the machine and everything else?
So actually, you're correct that I think now a lot of times the training is CPR/AED, and they do both all in the same training. However, I'm not certain that all teachers are required to get CPR training. I think I think one of our procedures talk about the fact that there has to be at least, I think at least 2 people in a building that are available with that training in case there is an emergency situation where the CPR need to be done. And at this point, I think then they have to put a CPR/AED. But I'll check on that too.
Yeah, that would be great, because I think the school district I worked in, and that was actually in Chicago and in Kansas City, all teachers had to be CPR trained. So I wonder if maybe the question is would there be an additional cost for Prince George's County if all teachers were? Because you can do those things online. It's not like you have to do, an in-person training, but you can do that too. But I wonder if that'd be helpful just to make sure that all teachers have some idea.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further comments? All righty, thank you, colleagues. So Ms. Welsh, did you want to bring this back with revisions, or did you want to just based off what I heard? I don't know if you want to discuss those items or bring it back.
Right. I'm thinking I need to do some research and get some more answers, maybe before we finalize this, you should send it through for action. Because I will go back and find the answers to these questions. If that's what you'd like to do, I think that might be helpful.
Yep. So we could bring it back as a discussion item. Thank you. Okie dokie. That concludes our discussion items. So jumping upwards to public comment, we have no registered public comment speakers this evening. Registered public comment speakers can be live, pre-recorded, using video or audio, or they may write to us as well. 3.0 legislative update. So update on May Legislative Committee. I'll yield the floor to Ms. Welsh.
So the MABES Legislative Committee meeting was on Monday, yesterday, and actually Chair Mickens Murray and Board Member Bizer-Strother both were in attendance for parts of the meeting. Chair Mickens Murray was there in the beginning, and then Bizer-Strother was there near the end. And so they reviewed, and we do have this up on the site so that people can go and look at the update and the information that has been provided related to these different bills and the status, what MABE's position is on the bills, and then there's a brief description about each of the bills. So again, I do encourage people to take the time to review them. I will say the 3 areas that the committee, that MABE spent time discussing with everyone had to do with the public employees. And did I jump ahead of it? Yes, I did. The Time to Care Act revisions, which has to do with the starting family and medical leave insurance program for employees, which there is a conversation about extending the date, I think maybe to June 1st, 2024 before it begins. And then there was some conversation about the fact, of course, that the employee must also contribute into the program. And so what would be the final cost in terms for the employer overall when making decisions about moving this bill forward? MABE is in support of this with amendments. And so right now, I mean, that's basically it in a nutshell. So they go into a lot of background information about it, but that's sort of basically what they shared. And then they also talked about the collective bargaining bills. And there's 2 collective bargaining bills that are currently out there in the legislature. The one Senate Bill 367 is called the Public Employee Relations Act. That particular bill also makes school calendar and class size permissive subjects of bargaining, which we did discuss the idea of class size being a permissive subject of bargaining, I think 2 meetings ago, and just the unintended consequences of such a move for the school systems. But what I think was most concerning was that currently there's a state labor relations board, and that is what hears decisions for arbitration and grievances and everything for employees. And they want to do away with that now and start with one called the Public Employees Relations Board that would oversee collective bargaining activities for certain public employees. And one of the current concerns they shared is that by doing away with the current board and then starting a new board, what it would do is, all right, so whenever there's cases that come up, the one case, the older case is like precedent for the most current case. And so any decisions that have happened in this other board, they have presidential value in making decisions for current cases. But if in fact this bill were to go through and they do away with the Public School Labor Relations Board, then all those cases that have presidential value would no longer be important. They may have some persuasive value, but they wouldn't carry as much weight. And that is, a real concern in the world of collective bargaining and employee labor law, basically. So that was the thing they discussed there. And MABE is opposing that bill. And then their other bill they have for collective bargaining, which we discussed, this is the one that just has to do with the class size, making class size permissive topic of bargaining. And MABE is opposing that. And then the last bill has to do with there's several bills that have to do with virtual school bills. And actually, PZAM just sent out a lot of information. And unfortunately, I just received today, and I have not had the opportunity to really spend time reading through all the information they provided related to the virtual bills. I do know that based on and certainly Chair Mickens-Murray, I think you were probably there during this discussion, or maybe it was Board Member Boozer-Strother, but if you have more you want to add about, please do. But I do recall that one of the things that they looked at was the fact of how restrictive or how prescriptive, I should say, these bills are for school systems to be able to operate the way they want to in terms of virtual education. And they are basically, MABE is supporting each of these bills, but each one has amendments. And a big part of it is just really attempting to make sure that there is flexibility in the ability for school systems to make decisions about how and when they want to use their virtual education. So that's about it in a nutshell, as a quick review. And then I know I think the last conversation had to do with follow up on your previous conversation related to House Bill 1079 and 437.
Thank you. So I'll yield to Vice Chair Fields for an update on this.
So we have sent a communication to Delegate Nick Charles, who is the chairman of the Prince George's County Legislative Delegation, that we intend to comment on the 2 bills that are up for consideration. And a letter has been drafted. I took on the task of drafting that letter. A final version will go out to all of our colleagues so that they can offer any final comments before we forward that letter to Delegate Charles. But we are at that process. We have some good discussion on it. There's already been one hearing on the bill. There is another hearing tomorrow in Annapolis, but Delegate Charles is well aware that we will be forwarding our comments to him.
Great.
Thank you, colleagues. Any comments or questions regarding legislative updates? Okie dokie, see none. We'll move to 5.0 policies for review or action. So we have 2 policies tonight.
Chair, we skipped Ms. May's blueprint update.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Ms. Boozer Strother.
Thank you so much for 3.2 update on specifically the May Blueprint Implementation Ad Hoc Committee, which I'm now thinking we probably should just rename this to our, Blueprint Implementation Update, because it's getting more diverse, how the information is coming. So that the May committee has still not met because we're waiting on a response from the governor on some questions. But I want to thank Board Member Fields for informing the board of the Strong Schools Maryland report card on implementation. And I think all the board members received the good news of our of how we are moving along without an AIB, setting us up well for that. So I would encourage everyone to review that, and if you use social media, send that out, let everyone know. And then the legislative bills, the update, there's a section on Blueprint that, some of it is, fixing some things that there are second thoughts about. And those I think are ones that we should really be paying close attention to our positions of support. I know that for the next agenda, I guess I've sent a communication to the chair and vice chair of the committee to help us prepare for the next meeting to have legislative positions on a subset of all these bills that we've been seeing, and also noting that we have gone outside education. We've looked at the clean energy schools related bills, this electric bus bills, that some of those may be relevant for support positions this year as well. So that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions or comments? Board Member Briggs.
Yes, thanks so much, Chair Saron Ruiz. I just had a question on Board Member Boozer Strother. I had a few people reach out to me about who is on the ad hoc committee. And I know you shared this during one of our previous meetings, and I was blanking, and would love it if, I'm not sure if you can just share an email to me and of course to other members of the Policy and Governance Committee with just that information at a high level. And then the other thing was that I had some questions about, and this may not be a part of the ad hoc committee, but there is some questions around the outreach to the public. And I believe there was a survey that was posted on PGCPS's website regarding the implementation of the blueprint. We were just curious if you could speak to that if possible.
Oh, sure. And on your first question, I think I would ask Chair Mickens Murray in her role as a board member of MABE to request the ad hoc committee membership list to be shared with our board. It's like I said, it's 12 of the 24 school districts are represented, and a single board member from each of the districts are on there. And the majority, those of us that were invited for the founding of this committee generally had already kind of established ourselves as board members who are very active along these last few years, and from the Kerwin Commission to the blueprint legislation. And that's how my invitation came about to serve on the ad hoc committee. On the second question, you do remind me that Dr. Libby, who presented to us at the last meeting, is working with all the blueprint plan writing teams to deliver that no later than March 15th. I know her goal is March 13th or 14th to submit the plan, and the survey is part of that process. So that, if I'm not mistaken, that survey closed about a week ago. So we could circle back to Dr. Libby about when that survey data, how that survey data will now move to information to the board.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think so just two follow-ups there was just the ad hoc committee. I think, again, I asked you this, Board Member Boozer Strother, so apologies since it's redundant, but what exactly that committee does again? And then I think the other piece was and you may not be the right person to answer this, so feel free to say I don't have an answer, but on the read the Dr. Libby piece, because I actually searched for the survey and couldn't find it and was just curious if that was clear because I'm not sure if members of the community also were able to find that and where they could find that.
Well, I do know it was sent to all the blast lists as I've received it from multiple channels. And saw it in otherwise, I mean, certainly a web home for it. But I'm sure she can report out, that aspect of the survey, exactly how it reached all the constituencies.
And I think the other question was just what the committee does again, what the ad hoc committee does.
Sure. It's not unlike other MABE committees where the goal is for the association to have input into it's probably most resembles the legislative committee. The legislative committee does have at least one representative from all 24 of the counties. So when the ad hoc committee came about last year, it was specifically as a subset because of just the massive scale of this legislation. And at the time, we were still, waiting for release of the funds for the accountability board to be constituted and start its work. So MABE did not want, the reasons the ad hoc committee is MABE just didn't want to miss a beat on paying attention to the landscape and what was happening with the AIB. So, I do not know how long MABE will determine that this particular ad hoc committee is needed as the blueprint becomes, as we're seeing this year already a legislative cycle that is, the blueprint is, always front and center, and aspects of the blueprint, that may need to be addressed legislatively. Certainly the number one thing we've done is a priorities list. We were all asked to go back to our implementation coordinators and ask where are the pain points. And so all of us sent those in, and the number one pain point is infrastructure for pre-K. The enough classrooms in the existing infrastructure and the need for funding to build pre-K centers, and also to help shore up our nonprofit and for-profit pre-K sector. Some was harmed during the pandemic and there are grants for them to come, to start pre-K. So that I would say that prioritization around the blueprint would be the number one thing we did so far in the existence of this committee. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful. Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Colleagues, any further discussion? All righty, thank you, Ms. Booster-Strother. All righty, now onto policies for review and action. So draft policy, student sunscreen use. Colleagues, may I have a motion to forward the new draft policy, student sunscreen use, to the full board for recommendation, well, with a recommendation for public comment. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved in second. I'll now yield the floor to Ms. Welsh to give us an overview of revisions.
So this is a brand new policy that was based on a law that was passed back in 2017, I believe. And it's now, of course, in statute, it's the educational article, section 7-442, and it basically says that we can authorize the students to possess and use sunscreen on school property or school-sponsored events, and they don't need any permission from a healthcare provider to use the sunscreen. And then also that we need to provide guidance, some training to students about sun safety in general and the use of sunscreen, and then using it on school property and school-sponsored events. There's nothing, it really hasn't changed at all. It went through the review, both with OGC and of course, board council, and Dr. Golson reviewed it and of course approved it. And so I think it's ready to take action on.
Thank you, colleagues. Any discussion? Okie dokie. Seeing none, are there any objections to forwarding this policy to the full board with a recommendation to seek public comment? Hearing none, motion passes. Policy will be moved to the full board with the recommendation to seek public comment. Next policy is policy 5162.1, do not resuscitate orders. Colleagues, may I have a motion to forward revised policy 5162.1 to the full board with a recommendation to seek public comment.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved in second. I'll now yield the floor to Ms. Welsh for a brief overview.
So policy 5162.1 has to do with the do not resuscitate orders, and the fact that the policy itself does recognize the right of parents or guardians to make decisions regarding healthcare measures for their children. And then it goes into detail about in the receipt, when we do receive it's a MOLST moist form, which is really has the do not resuscitate order on it. And when we do receive that, the importance of the school, of course, engaging the nurse or health services office in the process, and then developing a plan for the student in terms of including the parent in that plan development, so that there's a plan in terms of what would be done if the student were to have, like, say, a cardiac event or respiratory event, and ensuring that all staff that work with the student are communicated to and they know about it, and making sure that the order or the moist form is always with the student at any point in time, as well as a transportation protocol to ensure that if something were to happen while the student was on the bus, that the driver, or if there were assistant on the bus, would know immediately that this is a student that does have a form. And when they called 911, to make sure they gave it immediately to the 911 people that came, so that they would know how to proceed with the student. And then, of course, if in fact a student were to pass in an event like this, then ensuring that there's their crisis team, intervention team available to assist with both the students and staff in the school when an event like this happens.
Thank you, Ms. Welsh. Colleagues, any discussion? Okay, seeing no discussion, is there any objections to forwarding RISE policy 5162.1 to the full board with a recommendation to seek public comment? Hearing none, motion passes. This policy will be moved forward. 6.0 committee recommendations, there is none. Follow-ups from previous meetings will be posted on board docs upon receipt. Next steps, the next policy and governance committee meeting will be held on Tuesday, March 14th, 2023 at 5 p.m. This meeting will be virtual. Please check the board page on the PGCPS website for more information. And just for your information, colleagues, in this meeting, I plan for us to discuss bills, state bills for the board to take a stance on. So we will present it in the committee meeting to then forward it to the full board at their March meeting. I think it's the 20-something. But yeah, just a heads up, and I'll send those bills ahead of time so you guys can review and hopefully have any questions, comments prepared. So then, closing remarks. Thank you, everyone, for a great meeting. I think it went really well. We're ending a little bit sooner than last meeting, February 14th. But with that, colleagues, are there any additional comments from anyone before I request to adjourn?
So
Okay.
moved to adjourn.
Okay, hearing a motion to adjourn, is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Probably moved in second to adjourn the February 28th, 2023 Policy and Governance meeting at 6:35. Any objections? Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Right.
Thank you.